Hi, I'm Rebecca Snyder. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland-Delaware DC Press Association, and today in our Moving Forward series, we'll be talking about MDDC's Fall Readership Survey. We queried respondents, readers about their advertising and buying habits and what they're looking for when they're reading local news publications. So I'm going to share my screen. Feel free to go into the chat if you have questions, and we will work through it. Any questions before we get started? Okay, we're going in. So MDDC does a readership survey each fall. We alternate between having a editorially focused session where we're talking about, where we're asking specifically about how the publication and its editorial content is perceived in the marketplace, and on alternately in the even years, and this year, we query about advertising habits. We do that primarily to ensure that our publications are tailoring their advertising and content to the appropriate demographic. Now, I'm assuming that everybody can see my screen. If you can't, please give a holler. We run this survey through SurveyMonkey. We provide an individual URL for each publication. And this year we had, I think, a tremendous response in terms of number of publications participating. And the survey did run from September to yesterday, so through the 28th. We had 19 publications participate this year, which was more than double the number of our 2019 survey. However, overall, the number of responses was much lower. So we had 909 survey responses this year, as opposed to about 1,900 last year. Couple reasons that could be, just in terms of it could be that people are just distracted by other things going on in the world. You know, for posterity, I will note that we are right in front of the 2020 general election, which could definitely be pooling attention. It could be that, you know, the respondents were seeing this only in the print publication. The members who participated oftentimes will send an email invitation, we'll print the advertisement for the survey in the publication, or put it on their social media. So we don't have any real reasons why the number of responses are down, but it does give us a good sort of overview. So let's take a quick look at demographics. They are generally regular readers of the publication. So we're seeing this here, 68.51%. And about 35% report that they read a combination of print and online. So that's really consistent with what we found in 2019. Also consistent with last year, respondents report that about 49% say that just one person reads the publication. That's very close to last year's percentage of 48.74, and about 43% report that two people read the publication. So this year, most people heard about the survey through the print publication. Last year, most heard about it through an email invitation. We're also still consistent with 2019 findings demographically, except we're all a year older. So our largest majority of respondents are 65 or older. That's the boomers and silent generation. 47% fell into that demographic this year. Last year it was 46. 31% are the boomers aged 55 to 64. 16% are that Gen X, which is a little bit down from last year. 18% identified as ages 35 to 54. And then our millennials have also seen a sharp a sharper drop than the Gen X. So last year they comprised about 5% of our respondents. This year they comprise about 2.66. Females are still responding to our survey in larger numbers than males. And 28% of our respondents had a household income of over 100,000, which actually is higher than our findings from last year. And over half have a bachelor's degree or higher. So that kind of sets the scene on who is responding and who our general readers are. It is consistent year over year, so there's no I wouldn't think that anything is not valid in terms of our information. So as we're walking through the survey, we really wanted to understand what news topics are most important to these respondents. And it was pretty consistent and expected year over year. Breaking news is always the news category that is most often read. So this year it got 4.52 on a scale of 5. State and local government is a critical news area for these readers. And it looked like this year it ticked up a little bit. Last year it was 3.95. Now it's 4.30 out of that 5-point scale. That could be related to the election year and just the activity at the state level dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. But that is a tick up. Police and crime, again, is in the top 3. Again, a little bit more heightened importance. Coronavirus, as one would expect, is a huge information topic right now, and that popped into our top 4. And then interestingly enough, entertainment and things to do is also in that top 5 hit parade. And I think that might just speak to the fact that everybody's bored. They've got places that they want to go and they can't. Politics came in at also at a more heightened importance, this year. Consistent with last year, the least often read category was jobs. So bear with me for just a moment while I let someone into our meeting room. Jason, are you in with us now?
Hello.
Great. I just wanted to make sure I could let you into the meeting room properly.
Okay. It's just the 3 of us?
No. We've got a bunch of people.
Oh, okay.
And you can see my screen, correct?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. All right. So we're just jumping in. We talked a little bit about demographics of respondents to the readership survey and the top 5 categories, which are breaking news, state and local government, police and crime, coronavirus, entertainment, things to do, and then politics. So the top 6. So we ask how important and how often you actually read them. So they track pretty closely. So what we just talked about were how often they were read. And when we ask how important the following topics are, it does track very closely. However, healthcare is rated, let's see, that's 4th. So rated at 3.9, but it ranked 7th in the frequency of content read. So that might be something you want to take back to your newsrooms, that healthcare is important. That might be related to coronavirus, but it's not read as often as its importance would indicate. So the least important topic right now is sports. Last year it was lists and surveys. That really could be because there's just not a lot happening in sports because of the pandemic. So we have those questions kind of year over year so we can create more trend lines. And now we're going to get into the meat of those consumer buying decisions and the advertising related content. So we specifically asked, when respondents are making buying decisions, what is the most important consideration? And so quality was right on up there at 40%, followed by price at 29%, and then local or small business at 22%. Relationship with store is really trailing at just about 5.5%. We also allowed respondents to have open-ended responses. And so many of them said that all of those considerations factor in to a greater or lesser degree as they're making those buying decisions. But they also noted convenience, made in the USA, proximity, and availability, and value, so price relative to quality. An area that I think could be helpful as advertising reps are guiding the development of ads, or looking or advising on what to stress when putting things into an advertisement. I was not super surprised, but somewhat surprised that the role of reputation and calling out specific social responsibility was important to some respondents. So as you're guiding advertisers, these are the things that are most important to readers. So you might want to encourage them to emphasize that in their advertisements. And if you all have questions, feel free to jump in. It can be really boring listening to me talk all the time. So feel free to ask as things come up. We also talked a lot about trust. So in news media today, there's the idea that newspapers are trusted sources of information. Advertising is one type of information. And so we asked our survey respondents how much they trust advertisements seen in various venues. So, and it was on a scale of very likely to trust to very likely to mistrust. Now, I don't think it's any surprise for any of us to know that personal recommendations are right on up there. So 89% of respondents are likely or very likely to trust a personal recommendation. I think we can be super excited and gratified that local newspaper publication came in next with almost 64% likely or very likely to trust the advertisements they see in that venue. The local newspaper and publication website associated with the print publication came in, a little bit lower, 57% likely or very likely to trust. Now, when we get to digital advertising, like the Google and Facebook ads, they were overwhelmingly seen as neutral or negative. And I think this is, as advertising reps are kind of developing, you have to do the whole holistic marketing and have digital and print and social in there. But I think it's really important to point out how consumers look at Google and Facebook ads. So Google ads were seen as neutral, just straight out neutral, by about 60% of respondents. Now, nearly 30% of respondents were likely or very likely to mistrust Google ads. So we're talking about 90% of the population is either or I don't like Google ads. And they did better than Facebook. So 42% view Facebook ads as neutral, and 51% are likely or very likely to mistrust Facebook ads. So when we look at that other end of the scale on very likely to trust, less than 1% of respondents were very likely to trust Facebook ads. I was surprised because Facebook runs a lot of ads, but it also is having, just a real traumatic time in the marketplace in terms of how they're perceived. So I feel like that's an area that can bolster news media. So we also looked at what respondents are, where they're looking for information when they're making a buying decision. So this can really be shown up when you're advising one of your potential advertisers to know where they need to be, because this is where consumers are looking for information for when they're considering what to buy. So obviously, recommendations from someone 65%, And then they're also looking at the website of the business. So if your advertisers have an unattractive or difficult website, that's going to hurt them, because 62% of people that are making buying decisions are going to their website to look for information. They're also looking at search engines, over half. Newspaper websites at 32%, which I think is pretty substantial. So nearly a third of consumers are looking to their local news for information about what and what to buy. Things that aren't working so well for consumers are emails. 11% of people look for emails from the business about what to buy. And then direct mail just lands with a thud at 9%. People are not looking at direct mail when they're considering what to buy. They are looking in our open-ended responses. We saw Consumer Reports, Better Business Bureau, Yelp, and other kind of recommendation sites. I think what you can pull out of here is that in an advertisement, if you have the ability to kind of sculpt an advertisement for someone, you want to be bringing home the personal recommendations. So maybe it's a testimonial from someone in the community, or maybe it's a picture of like a real person buying something. It's that idea of personalization, connection, and giving a recommendation. You see that across the board in, looking at rating sites and Yelp and reviews and Consumer Reports as well. That's all real straightforward information about people's experience with a product or service. So when we look in the advertisement that people view, everyone wants sales or specials. So everybody wants a deal. About 79% of respondents look for that. So again, when you are developing advertising, I think it would be helpful to develop packages or specials, even if they're not necessarily, take 20% off everything. It's how can you craft something that appears to be a special or a package that can attract consumers. They're also looking for specific information about the products and services. I was surprised that 44% look for the business hours of operation in the advertisement itself. They're also looking for website or social media information. About 25% are looking for that. Coronavirus precautions are also something that people are looking for, not to as significant a degree as those sales and specials or logistic information, but they are looking to know that the businesses that they're frequenting are taking precautions around coronavirus. One thing that I found interesting in the open-ended responses, many people noted that address information for a business is usually missing. I see that often in websites, and I definitely see it in advertisements. And if you think about the importance of local businesses, which consumers want to support their local businesses, they want to support small businesses, they kind of need to know where they are. So providing some address information might also be something that you make sure your advertisers know is important to consumers. And then we talked about the future. So we phrased this question in understanding where the respondent or members of their household plan to shop in the next 12 months or after the pandemic eases. Some of our open-ended responses were like, why do you think I'm waiting? But for the most part, it does seem like people want to wait until the pandemic kind of eases a little bit more. Now I think, and I'll just scroll down to this table so you can see it. And this is, basically our entire region, because we had good representation from publications across the region in Delaware, in Western Maryland, in Central Maryland, and in DC. People want to go to restaurants and bars, just straight out. It looks like there is this ache and desire. If 80% of our respondents are saying in the next 12 months, I'm going to go to a restaurant or a bar. That's super helpful to know. Local retail shops are right up there at 70%. And you can see it sort of all down the line that outdoor things obviously are something that's important to them. And then there's also some, colleges, high schools, and trade schools are kind of our lowest sort of future plans. That might be because people's plans are already in place and they're not thinking kind of big picture in that way. They're thinking, where do I personally want to go? But I think when we're looking at how we can bring advertisers back into our publications or galvanize on what we're looking to or build on people's buying habits, these sectors would be ones that you'll want to focus on. So, any questions so far? All right, I'm going to scroll on down. I just added some open-ended responses. Religious services were also something that people said they would frequent. Vacation. And vacation kind of came up with a lot of emojis as well. So I think there's, again, that pent-up desire to just have fun and relax and go somewhere. So that might be ways you can kind of weave that into your advertising or into your pitches. People are also looking for small businesses, minority-owned businesses to support. I think that kind of resonates with the social justice movements that are going across the country now. More of an emphasis on Black Lives Matter or voices that aren't always heard. So that can also be if you have an advertiser who is a small business or who is a Black-owned business, that might be something to really highlight right now. Now let's talk a little bit about the effect of publications on buying habits. So I think there's a really good story to tell here. 75% of respondents report considering or making buying decisions as a result of an advertisement seen in the publication. So the choices there were yes, always, yes, frequently, yes, sometimes, no, no, and like absolutely not. So we had nearly 46% saying yes, sometimes, and you have a super strong respondent pool, about 5% saying, yes, I always consider or make buying decisions as a result of what I'm seeing in the publication. I think that's pretty incredible. And then to kind of dovetail with that, 55% feel that their buying decisions are influenced by advertising or content that they're seeing in the publication. So that 75% of respondents say, yes, we consider or make buying decisions. And then 56% say, yeah, we're influenced by it. So it's kind of a subtle distinction between the two questions. We also checked to see how often advertisements are read in the publication. So when we look at that, retail store ads, and this kind of goes along with the idea of supporting local small businesses and the restaurants and bars and the local retail shops, which are scoring pretty high, people are more attuned to retail store ads. So the second highest, and this is a 4-point scale, so it's not like everything is dreadful. And it kind of also, to me, says that advertisements really need to jump out and capture the reader, because they're not necessarily something that you say, oh, I always read these advertisements, or I'm reading this particular thing. Advertisements tend to stay in the context of other news and information, so they almost fade into the background, as I think you all know. So retail store ads are top of the hit parade, but then content-focused special sections, and I know a lot of members are really focusing on these areas and have been for some time. You're seeing that effect in that people are looking at them. So it ranks second in the most highly read advertisements. Contests and promotions are definitely seeing a surge of interest. I know some members are specifically running contests and promotions to drive readership. So that may skew the results of this survey a little bit, depending on, because those publications might be attracting people who are doing content, who want contests and promotions. Ad inserts are still really strong. You can see sort of down the line, I think the real sadness here is that automotive ads are just not getting any play at all. They're ranking, at 1.63. It could be that people aren't really going anywhere, and that's why we're seeing people not pay attention to automotive ads. But that also kind of goes up to when we're looking at buying decisions and buying habits. Only 14% of people are going to plan to frequent a new car dealership in the next 12 months, and only 8% want to frequent a used car dealership. So it seems like automotive's just not pulling right now, which I don't think is a huge surprise.
Hey, Rebecca.
Yeah.
I kind of think that's because that's not something you buy on a weekly basis. You only buy a car every 5 years or so. So only 20% of the population would even be interested in buying a car or your readership.
Right.
So I think that might skew that number some.
That's a really good point. So I think there's always ways that, we can kind of understand those buying habits. And as you guys look through these numbers, of course, it can be different for different marketplaces as well. And it's always interesting to see how your publication stacks up to these rolled up regional results.
Hey,
this
Rebecca.
year yeah, go ahead.
Hey, quick question. It's Kevin. Scrolling back up a hair where it's talking about who reads the different types of advertisements and retail store ads being a 2.68. How would you define what 2.68 means? Would that mean like somewhat often, kind of somewhere in between? Like what would that definition of 2.68 be based on that 4-point scale?
So, and actually I can pull up that specific, let me look at the raw data to really to drill into that a little bit more. So when we look at the, bear with me while I just pull it up.
60-70%.
So our choices were always, frequently, occasionally, or never. So when we look at retail store ads, 40% frequently look at that, 20% always look at it, and 30% occasionally. For retail ads, 9.67% never look at say they never look at retail store ads. So that's what rolls up. It's a weighted average on a 4-point scale.
I see. These are great numbers. Yeah. Yeah.
It'd be 67%. 67% of the readers.
Yeah. And so when you're looking at special content, you've got 16% always looking at it, 32 frequently, and 40% occasionally. So I will actually, based on that feedback, I'll make this chart a little bit more definitive so you can kind of see where your always are and where your frequently and occasionally are as well. Yeah. And so just looking at automotive again, you've got 45% saying they never look at that, 40% are occasional, 7.5 are frequent, and 3.2 are always. So I think that probably goes to Sue's point in terms of it, it being sort of an infrequent major purchase. Any other questions on that? So I just wanted to end with our last, one of our last questions was public notice advertising. That's something that we try and query each and every time. If you see public notice crop up throughout our survey asking, how often you read public notices, how important they are to you. And those always, they're not the bottom of the hit parade, which is great, but they usually score kind of low. But we asked this year a different question. We wanted to know if respondents felt that public notices should be published in the local newspaper and its website, posted on a government website only, or if they had no preference. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that 67% believe that public notices should be published in the local newspaper and its website. And only 7% of people felt that it should be posted on a government website only. So it seems to be that people may not read their public notices all the time, but they feel they want them to be available, and they want them to be in an easily accessible place that they already go, like the local newspaper and the website. So I think there's some good stories to tell there. So I think the results of the survey really show us how we can tailor our advertising. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can talk a little bit more. To share with our advertisers some actionable information and make sure that we have content that is delivering the audience for advertisers, but also giving them giving consumers what they're looking for and helping them in their buying decisions. So lots of good information there. I want to check in with you all if there's kind of technical questions or how you think you might use this information. Anybody planning to maybe use it in their next advertising pitch, or ways we can help present it for you?
I think we'll probably make a flyer, with some of the points on there that we can hand out to people.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that I especially liked the how trusted newspapers are. And we see that on the national level, but it's really nice to have regional results. I think we'll look at, in last week's planner, I sent out a link to some resources that the Newspaper Association managers have around different sectors and buying habits. And so I'll see if we can spin together maybe some infographics for members' use as well on those things. Great.
Yep, Rebecca, I'm already working on that on my other screen. Yeah, so I think for me as an advertising salesperson, I think this tells a really compelling story. I expected the data to come back positively anyway, but the extremes I think are very, very encouraging, and specifically with public notice, while people aren't frequently looking at public notices every day, the fact that they want it available to them in the free press, I think speaks a huge message with the need and the trust of what our members do and what our members provide. And that's very marketable as we go to businesses, because it shows that the publications are highly read.
Absolutely. No, I think that's important to know. We also, just having, this is not a statistically significant sampling. I don't think we could go to the mat and be like, yes, this is all set. So it's more of a general snapshot of people's interests and thoughts in this time, but it definitely lines up with what we saw last year. And as we do these surveys more consistently, we will be able to develop stronger trend lines. So even though our number of respondents was down year over year, it's very consistent in what they're spending in what they're saying. So I think it's helpful that we can use this information and feel confident in it, even if it's not, a statistically significant portion of the readership for the region. So, any other questions? Anything else that you want to bring up at this point?
Hi, Rebecca. Georgie from APG.
Hey.
Hi. I just wanted to share with you that we're working on revamping our house fillers for our legal advertising sections. And I think some of this information that you've supplied in the readership survey, we might be able to use some of it. So thank you.
Oh, good. You're very welcome. And so I think, Georgie, you were connecting to audio when I was saying that we'll provide the results for each publication that participated, maybe by the end of the day, probably more likely Monday. So you can maybe even use in more drilled down results if that's helpful.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. Well, if no one has other questions or things that they want to bring up, I will we'll end here.
Rebecca?
I will. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, one last question, but this kind of occurred to me as you were going through the survey results. I don't know what everybody else in the call calls them, but the aggregator apps that we're seeing more and more of, like the local breaking news, are making obviously big pushes into the marketplace to try to grab up, you know, clickbait by using our links into it. How does that affect when we're asking people if they get their information from us versus like an app or an outside source? I mean, do you think that's deferring some of the results because people are thinking that they're getting it kind of, you know, through the back door or whatever it is? Or are we getting recognition for them reading that content, even if they're going to an aggregator app?
You know, and I think that's more of that would be something that we would query in the editorial side. So when we do this next year, I think because we're seeing more of a prevalence of those aggregator apps, as you said, that's something that I'll put on our list to make sure we specifically call out next year. We didn't have a question specifically on like where you read your news. The closest thing we did for that was more couched in terms of where do you read content from this publication. And some people characterize themselves as regular readers, and a combination of print and online. We did ask if they read only on social media, and that was a very small percentage. So about 3.43% of people said that they read on social media only. And I would imagine that those are people who, you know, are just scrolling through their Facebook and see it there and occasionally will click through to read an article of interest. The online only percentage was about 31%. So I think that also could be, that maybe is coming through some of those aggregators. But for this survey, they obviously know where the source information is coming from because they're talking about your publication. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and there were also a lot of responses as to, you know, sort of, as I was looking through some of those open-ended responses, there were more about like, oh, I've just seen this publication for the first time, here, there, or whatnot. So they're talking a little bit more about where they found the publication as opposed to where they found the survey. But that's also interesting, kind of open-ended response. So that'll be included in each of your individual survey results.
All right.
Okay. Well, going once, going twice on questions. All right. So it looks like we are set. I'll get these out to you, and I really appreciate your time today. And I look forward to seeing what the results of our readership survey are next year. So thank you very much for joining me, and stay in touch.
Great job, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.